Hi, my name's Steve Savile. I've been a full-time writer now since 2005. I've been first published, I think it would be 1991. My first agent as a writer would have been 1989, which makes me feel really old, let's be honest. I had a lot of hair when I started out. I no longer have a lot of hair. Right, so if you were to have encountered me, probably it would be from the first stuff I did when I was quite young. I did the English children's adaptations of Star Wars, Return of the Jedi. I did the children's version of Jurassic Park, The Lost World. And those were my first two published things. At the time, I thought I was a horror writer. So it was quite bizarre to land these two things. Beyond that, I've worked with things like Warhammer, Stargate, Doctor Who, Torchwood for the BBC, Primeval for ITV. I've done my own thrillers, a group called the Ogmios series that I've done quite well. The final book is on its way pretty much any minute. I was editing it on the train on the way down. I've, I think, published something like 56 novels now. Could be a little more. It's sometimes a little tricky to remember exactly because I'm about 2 years ahead in what I've written to what's actually come out. Even in this modern age of digital publishing, there's still plenty that if I died today would still come in the future. Right, so to give you an idea of how it started, I guess, it was an obsession. I was at university, I was studying politics, and I really didn't want to do it. So I would sneak off, I'd go to the library or I'd stay at home when my mum went to work, and I had in my head that I was going to write the great comic fantasy novel. And I sat down and I wrote the strangest, and I've still got it, I wrote the strangest thing I've ever written, which is called Old Yawn and the Wizard's Banana. And I had this really obscure idea that the natural fruits of the earth contained earth magic, so therefore, you know, you great magicians use bananas and apples and oranges and fruits to draw their magic and their power. And someone had kidnapped the greatest wizard of all time while he'd set a rain spell going, and it had been raining now for, I think, 700 days non-stop. So everyone was a bit fed up and they wanted to rescue the wizard who'd been kidnapped. And it was awful. It was truly, truly awful. It was full of bad puns. Lines still stick in my head. Like there was the first time we met the heroes in his office. Oh, yeah, skip there. It was basically a blatant rip-off of Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd moonlighting. And it was a fantasy version of this with demons, to the extent that the names of the characters were almost anagrams of the characters from Moonlighting. And it really was, it was full of terrible lines, like she rolled her eyes at him, he picked them up and rolled them right back. Oh man, my feet are killing me, well then learn self-defense. All this kind of stuff. I mean, it was dreadful. But it still makes me laugh. And I went from that and I wrote another one called the Oh My God, Not Again Riad, which basically was the plot of the Belgariad and the plot of Thomas Covenant and the plot of Terry Pratchett, and all mashed into one story. And I sent that to Interzone magazine in England, and the editor wrote back, and it was the nastiest rejection I've ever had. And all it said was, "The world does not need another Terry Pratchett." So when Terry died a couple of years ago, there was a little part of me that wanted to write back to him and go, well, now it does. But, you know, not really, that's a joke. So from there, it's one of these weird things where no one ever told me I couldn't do it. So I just sat down and thought, well, okay, I'm gonna write a horror book. And we had a series of magazines in England that was called Fear and Frighteners. And I wrote a 40,000 word short story and submitted it. And the editor loved it and bought it. And then I thought, this is easy. And I wrote, I think, 2 20,000 word ones for Frighteners, and the editor went, oh, this is great, we'll buy those. I thought, fantastic, I'm making money dead easy here. This is great. I'm going to be an overnight sensation. I went to the bank and I borrowed money to buy a really good computer based on the money that I was going to make from the stories when they came out. Magazine went bust. Whole parent company went bust, never got paid. Those stories never came out. And I was sat going, I've got a 40,000 word story. What the hell am I going to do with that? I know, I'll try and make it into a 60,000 word story and it becomes a book. So I went up to the library, this is the good old days, I went up to the library and picked up the Writers and Artists Handbook and picked 10 agents, pretty much at random, just going in and going, okay, name number 1, oh that's a good name, name number 2, I like that. And I wrote to these agents. And they tell you nowadays, you know, keep your pitch very short, the hook, the log line of the book, whatever. I wrote them a 10,000 word letter, and I detailed pretty much everything I was going to write until I was about 60. I mean, it was the most batshit crazy letter. Because I thought they would want to know about the career I had planned for myself and where it was going. So I broke pretty much every rule of submission you're meant to do. Within 48 hours of posting the letter, 9 of the 10 agents wrote back and said, please can we see the book? So I had to go up to the local shop and pay to get 9 copies of the manuscript photocopied. Because, you know, old school, right? Then posted those off, and within 3 days of posting them off, so still in the same week basically, 10:30 at night, we got a phone call at home, and my dad is, sense of humour. So he picks up the phone and he says, you know, hello, the Prada Mental Hospital. We have a famous mental hospital just down the road. And the woman on the other end of the phone was like, I'm looking for Steve Savile. He's like, oh yes, inmate Savile, not a problem. So, you know, I go to the phone and she's like, are you in a mental institution? I'm like, no, it's just my dad. And she's like, well, would you come down to London tomorrow, you know, Monday, Tuesday? I read the book, I love it. I think there's a great future here. I'm like, oh, fantastic. So hiked down to London, signed up for my first agent, came back from London, and there were, I think, 7 more offers from other agencies that had arrived while I was down there on the couple of days I was away. But I ended up signing for lovely woman, but I think she looked upon me as the interesting grandson. And she kept saying things like, you know, put more magic into it, make it more fantastical. So I did, and we went from 60,000 words to 80,000 words. And she sent it out to publishers, and it went to Stephen King's editor, and it went everywhere. We got a great rejection from the guy at Simon & Schuster who discovered Stephen King, who basically says, this is the most exciting book I've read since picking up Carrie the first time, but we're not doing horror anymore. And it's like, okay. And it got that reaction everywhere, where it didn't happen. So okay, fine. And then it went to Transworld, which are now Bantam and were then Corgi and others, and they actually loved it. And we got an offer, which is great. I mean, I've seen the letters from the publisher. It was going to be one of, I think, 30 books they were releasing. I don't even remember what year it is now. And then something crazy happened, and we had this. Well, I blame Sting, right? It's all his fault. He went on his rainforest crusade. And through the Rainforest Crusade, basically you saw paper prices in England go through the roof. The netbook agreement collapsed, all sorts of things went crazy. And the price of a paperback at the time was about 49 pence. And over 6 months, it went up to £4.99. So you're looking at like, my maths is a bit ropey, but I don't know, it's more than 600% rise. It was a large price rise. And the publishers basically said, look, okay, we can't afford to do so many new books. Not writers that have no history that we're unable to deal with. So we're going to let go a number of the titles we bought. So that was it. That book didn't come out, but I got to keep the money, which was good. My agent then fell out of love with me because obviously, you know, they don't like it when they don't make money. And I'd gone and written a ridiculously long horror novel after it on the base of advice from Richard Lehman, the American horror writer. And his advice was basically the longer the better. So I'd written a 200,000 word horror novel right at the time where paper became horribly expensive and all the books were shrinking down to nothing. So pre-Tad Williams blowing it back up again. And like I said, my career very much was a case of write it, sell it, it never comes out. I did a kid's guide to the internet. I did two preteen romance novels and one preteen horror novel for a company called Henderson's that became Dorling Kindersley, and through there. And it like with the guide to the internet, it was crazy. I wrote it, delivered it, and basically the next, I think about 2 months later, Netscape was due to arrive. So we are going back and trying to explain to the editor why they had to release it straight away and why they couldn't actually release it in 12 months as their plan, because, you know, pictures. The internet was going to go crazy. They weren't getting it, and as a result, again, it's another book that didn't come out. And I kind of got to the stage where I thought, you know what, it's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And this editor, who I'd worked with on, I think, 5 books that didn't come out, phoned me up one day, and she said, okay, I've got a job for you, but I can't tell you what it is. I'm like, okay, am I going to want to do it? She went, I think you're going to want to do it. I'm like, okay. So when can you tell me what it is? I said, well, I can tell you what it is when you've signed the contract to do it. I'm like, okay, so what if I don't want to do it? She said, well, I think you're going to want to do it. I'm like, okay. So any clues? She said, well, okay, I'll give you one clue. Do you like space? And I'm like, well, I did when I was like 7. So then you'll probably want to do it. I'm like, okay. She says, actually, we've got 2 books. And the other one, the clue for the other one would be, you know, do you like dinosaurs? And it's like, again, maybe when I was 6 or 7, yeah, they were cool. It's like, okay. In which case, you know, you might want to sign the contract. So I signed the contract, and I got the phone call through pretty much straight away after that said, well, here you go. You're doing the kids' adaptations of Return of the Jedi, and we're not open. Star Wars. So that was, it was a slightly strange introduction to the writing world. After that, I guess there was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years where I was writing and not selling stuff. I emigrated, and then found myself in this very weird situation where technically my only published books were kids' books, and yet I was this, you know, big horror fan. It didn't quite make sense. And I think, I guess technically it was 1999, 2000 when I wrote a story because a friend of mine had won this American competition, this Writers of the Future, and I thought, well, if he can win it, I can win it. All right, you know, that wonderful arrogance of youth. So I wrote this story and posted it, and the way the competition worked, it had quarterly entries, and I posted it the day after the most recent quarter had ended. So I had the longest wait you could possibly imagine. I think it was like a year until I actually found out. And everybody else, they find out really early that they're in the running, and they get nervous. They get phone calls saying, well, you're a quarter finalist, you're a semi-finalist, you're a finalist, you're a winner. I got an email at 10 o'clock in the morning saying that I'd won it. I didn't get anything in the process up because I was like the last, and that, I guess, would be the moment to say, well, it all changed with that. They swooped us out to Hollywood, red carpet treatment, got to hang out with a lot of the great science fiction writers, Robert Silverberg, Hal Clement, Fred Pohl, became really good friends with Kevin J. Anderson, Tim Powers, and kind of got the confidence that somebody would pay decent money for the work. And from there, it was that case of sort of bartering, saying, okay, well, I've done this, I want to do this. And I found myself, writing to the guys at Warhammer saying, well, I've done these, I'd like to do that. And to the guys at Doctor Who saying, well, I've just done Warhammer, I really want to write Doctor Who. And using each new job to buy a way to get into the next one. And for about, I guess, 5 or 6 years, I did a lot of this media tie-in work. Almost because I didn't have the confidence still in my own stuff, so I was hiding behind the characters, the name of the other stuff. Not entirely sure that people would want to buy my stuff. And then after about 5 or 6 years of doing it, I thought, you know what? Time to start doing my own things. And I know I was giving a talk when Parallel Lines, my crime novel, came out last year, trying to explain that I'd had the first idea for the book 11 years earlier. I'd written the first lines. And like with Glass Town, that came out last December, I'd actually written the first pages of that 5 years earlier. And I posted on Facebook the other day, I've had this great idea for a new thriller. I know full well no one in the world is going to see it for at least 5 years. It's that far behind, and I've got that much going on, and when I will get to write it, and even if I started it today, it still could be 4, 5, 6 years. And yet, weirdly, because of the way publishing works, it looks like, I must write 20 books in a week, because they all come out. I mean, if I look at the publication schedule now, I've got one, say, Bones of Empire coming out on August the 1st. Coldfall Wood is coming out on August the 21st. And The Memory Man, the new crime novel, is coming out on October the 31st. So it's like, oh, crap, does this guy never stop? It's three new novels in basically 6 weeks. Nobody seems to realise that the first one of those was written 3 years ago, and it's the way it goes. So we'll start with one of the stories I think that was very much a fundamental change, where I got the courage to be me, is the crime novel Parallel Lines. And this is the one that took like 11 years from the first sentence to the publication. And I tried several times to write it. I wrote the first 20,000 words, and this is shit. Threw it away. It's the strangest thing. So for anyone who does write, I don't write like this. I don't do this. I came home from work. I was teaching at the time. I came home from work, and I picked up a piece of paper, and I literally just wrote a cast list. We'll get rid of the Geordie there. A cast list where I just wrote down a series of names, and it was like Amy, the erotic dancer, and Adam, the bank robber, and so-and-so, the Robin Hood bank manager. And it's just a list. And I found that I was like drawing one line to him, and his story went to there, and it became this elaborate sheet. In terms of like when you collaborate and work with someone else, one of the phrases they use is like a hot potato. So you'll write the story to a point, and then you'll throw it on to the next guy like it's a hot potato, and he'll catch it, jump it, and throw it on to the next. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can tell a story from the point of view of these characters like a hot potato, where we stay with this guy to a point, and then we throw the story onto the next guy, and we stay with them for a point, and we throw the story onto the next, and the next, and the next. And kind of, well, when I sign the book now, I cross out, because it's called Parallel Lines, and I cross out the N, because it's parallel lies. You can't trust anything you know from any of these people. Like the bank manager is literally robbing his own bank while it's being robbed. So he can't tell anybody. He can't call the police in, because then his crime will be uncovered. And the bouncer from the nightclub is also a pimp who is manipulating the girl, who's trying to get money for her mom. And it's all very, it's very cinematic. And say, I tried and tried and tried to write this idea. And every time I wrote it, I'm like, this is shit. It's not what's in my head. And I couldn't, for the life of me, work out what was wrong. But I knew that if I just gave it time, it would knit together. It would fester into something. And then real life came along, and it was my father-in-law at the time. Technically still my father-in-law. I was going through the divorce, and because I knew very few people, he came to help me move house and move out. And as we're carrying the boxes, he's telling me how he's got a twitch in his little finger, and he's going to have to go in for an operation on it. It's like a trapped nerve or something. And I just finished reading the Michael J. Fox autobiography, Lucky Man, and how, he'd woken up on the set that morning with a twitch in his little finger, and he couldn't control his little finger. And I'm like, oh shit, I don't like the sound of that. Maybe a trapped nerve, but I don't like the sound of that. And say Sven had the operation, and so say we're in the pizza place, and he's trying to cut the food, and he can't cut the food, and he's holding the spork, the knife and fork, and he can't grip it and balance it in the right way, and he just casually throws out this joke saying, I'd be the worst person to rob a bank. And it's just like a light bulb moment in the head. It's like, bing, this is what's been missing from the story. Here's a guy who, he's got something fundamentally wrong with him, that whenever he's under pressure, it's going to be exacerbated. It's going to get worse. So if you're holding a gun and you're stressed, your control of the gun is going to get less and less and less the more stressed you get. And your hand is shaking, and the last thing you want to do is pull the trigger. But this is it. In my head, I'd always thought the story would be about the bank robbery up to a certain point, and then the guy would kill someone. And that wasn't it at all. It was that my bank robber was desperate. He had the same disease. He had ALS, and he's trying to provide for a son who's not going to be around to look after. And he gets stressed, and the gun goes off. He can't control it. His finger twitches, gun goes off, and he kills a guy. But it just so happens that the guy he kills is like the biggest bastard on the planet. And everybody in that bank has a reason to want that man dead. So suddenly it stops being about a bank robbery, and it becomes how to get away with murder. And it's the strangest little flick on its head as a story. And once that was clear in my head, I'm like, fantastic, I know what I'm doing. And I wrote half of it, and I thought, yay, I've got it. No, it's shit. It's shit again. What's wrong? I don't know what's wrong. And I put it down for 6 years because I could not work out what was wrong. And I was in London, and a friend of mine said, Steve, you write books, tell me a story. And I'm like, oh, you swine. Because, I can't tell stories. So we're walking along the Thames, and for some reason I can't fathom, I start to tell her the story of the bank robbery. And I'm talking her through it, and I realise as I'm telling the story, I don't know how it ends. I don't know where it goes. I don't know anything about it. This is going to be a pretty fucking miserable story to share with her, because I'm literally going to get it all wrong. And then I end up having those light bulb moments where I'm sat on Beryl Reid's bench in a church just off Covent Garden, and suddenly the book, The Thing, is coming alive. And I managed to talk my way right through the whole story, right to the very end. And I'm like, I've got it. Holy shit. Finally, like 10 years on, it's there. It's all finished. So when I got back home to Sweden, it's weird. I even know the day that I did it, because I was sat in the house watching the World Cup, and Germany scored 7 past Brazil. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's a great night. I'm going to write a pitch for the book. So 10 o'clock at night, I sit down and I write the pitch, and it takes an hour and a half to write the story, start to finish. And I sent it into the editor at Titan. And I woke up in the morning to an offer to buy the book. So it literally sold overnight. From writing the pitch to sell the book to the book being bought was, I think, about 8 hours. By far the fastest, strangest, slowest creation of a book ever. And that was one of the first times that I kind of had faith in my own story, but realised that it really was. It's a slow process, and actually my own stories, then, you know, it's not like a greenhouse where you can hothouse something. It takes time. It needs room to breathe. It needs room to grow. And almost certainly my first ideas are shite. And my second ideas and my third ideas. But I get to the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and it starts to come together, and it works. I think the next one would be Glass Town. And it's a similar thing. The wife went shopping in Selfridges, and I went across the street to Starbucks, and I went down the basement with a notebook and no idea, just that I'm going to kill some time. And within an hour and a half of her pottering around Selfridges and spending far too much money, I came up with an entire plot for a book. And it's one of those ones where you work on it and you work on it. You think, oh yeah, there's a cool little idea here. The whole idea of a piece of London that has been hidden away by a stage magician in the 1920s, and it's all linked to gangsters, to like the Ronnie and Reggie craze of the 1920s, and this core idea that Alfred Hitchcock. So I don't know what you know about this kind of stuff, so I'm going to assume you know nothing. Hitchcock's first movie, The Number 13, doesn't exist. He made the movie, they ran out of money when they're making the movie, and at the time, the silver nitrate in the film was more valuable than the film itself, because who the hell was Alfred Hitchcock? So the only copies of the movie were taken and melted down for the chemical ingredients. So it's one of those things that, it doesn't exist. It's not out there. Nobody really knows what it was about. It was about building the Peabody Trust in London. I thought, okay, I'm going to use the Hitchcock movie, and it's the right time. I'm going to have an actress from the movie who was kidnapped because one gangster was in love with the woman. It's all great. And you kind of forget that at this time, women in England didn't have the vote. The idea of a man of let's say dubious power, but a gangster in that era, simply wanting to possess something he can't have, to own. So I started trying to think along the lines of what would a man of that era, who is kind of captivated by this really attractive woman who, she has the, for want of a better phrase, the X factor. She's got the potential to be a Greta Garbo or whatever. And so I ended up writing the book, but I wrote it with that from his point of view. So any of his stuff from his point of view, it would seem quite sexist from the modern standpoint, because all of his viewpoints are based in 1923. Always fun when you then read the reviews who say, you know, you're a misogynistic twat. And it's like, well, actually, no. And of course, it's a homage to the black and white movies. So there's a section in the book where you see a sign on the side of the road, and it says, "Save me." And you know, if you think back to the old black and white movies, they had those cards that came up. And it would, you know, the music would be playing because there's no speech. Music would be playing, card would come up, and they'd be like, "Help, help me!" And it's one of those. And there are all these little bits that are meant to be, you know, homages to the 1920 silent movies. That certain readers went like, "Oh dear me, he's such a woman hater." And it's like, no, oh yeah. But you can't help it. You can't go out there and say, well, actually, no, you're wrong. Because that's even worse, because then you become a mansplaining woman hater. It's like, you're doomed. There's nothing you can do. So you just sort of roll with it, go, okay, fine. That's your interpretation. Great. And that's how I wrote this, and I love it. I think it's my favourite book of the things I've done. And then weirdly, I had another book under the contract with the same publisher, which is about the return of the once and future king, and the idea that, you know, at the time of England's greatest need, this hero would return. But given the last time he was here, it was pretty much Dark Ages England. It was lush forests and greenery and fresh air and all this stuff. What would he consider to be the greatest threat to this green and pleasant land? Well, it would be us. You know, our factories, our chemicals, our way of living. So rather than him coming back and being the great saviour for us, he's coming back and being the great saviour for the land, which means he's the biggest threat to us. And it's a very environmental book, and it's very much about the destruction we're putting on society. But there was a line in Glass Town, the book before, that simply, it was written on a floorboard, and it was a throwaway line, and it was just one for one. And I had no idea what it meant. And I'm halfway through writing this, and I'm like, whoa, shit, I know what that line meant. It meant these two books are linked. They're completely linked, and I know why, and I know how. So I went away and finished it, and delivered it to the publisher, going, you're going to hate me. Because I've just written a sequel to the book that was a standalone book. And he's like, oh God, okay. And he read it, and he's like, oh, it's a great book. It's really good. And I'm like, okay, we'll work on it. I you know, as usual, I spent about a year and a half editing it and fixing it and rewriting it and polishing it. And the very first review just arrived day before yesterday, and it was fantastic. So. Well, one of my favourite stories. So it starts tragically. My dad died a couple of years ago, and I'm flying back between him dying and the funeral, and I don't talk to people. I get on the train, I put my headphones on. Fuck it, I don't want to know. But this time, I got on the train, and I'm in a shit mood, and I really don't want to listen to music or do anything. And this gentleman gets on and sits beside me, and I've got no idea who he is, and he could have sat anywhere on the fucking train, but he decided he was going to sit next to me, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'm going to be social, he's going to talk to me. And the guy's like, hi, and I'm like, oh, hi, you know, hi, pleased to meet you. And I'm like, I don't really feel like talking, but we start talking. And the guy is fascinating. I mean, genuinely fascinating. We start originally sort of talking about, you know, the ridiculousness of the doctors and the fact that, you know, Dad had I think 10 of 12 symptoms for this particular cancer that he got, and it's still taken them a year to diagnose him. And it's like, you know, I could have fucking Dr. Googled it in 5 minutes. You think it's fairly obvious. And he said how you know, he was a doctor, and at the moment he was going up to, I don't know if it's Farlan or wherever, to the university hospital up there, because he was giving lectures because he was worried that the knowledge he had was going to die out. when he was, because I thought he meant he was retiring, but he wasn't. He had cancer. He was dying. All right, so I had no idea, and we talked because the train broke down, and we ended up talking for 3 hours, and it was genuinely one of the best conversations of my life. It was superb, and it was about everything. So I go home, I tell the wife, I met this really cool old guy on the train, and we talked for ages. I'm like, some doctor guy, his name was Hans, and she's like, all right, yeah. And I sort of filed it away, thinking, okay, well, that was a great conversation. It was when I needed it. Then, I don't know, 7 months, 8 months later, the wife comes through and she's really upset. Piece on the news, this very famous gentleman has died. Hans Rosling. That was the guy I was sat next on the train for 3.5 hours talking to. I had no idea who he was. So she's talking about it. I go through and look at her. Oh, that's the guy I was talking to on the train. That man there. And suddenly it was that realization when he'd said that all of the kunskap, the knowledge that he'd got, he was terrified that it was going to disappear. Well, yeah, I mean, he had a ticking clock over his head. He knew he was dying. And he was trying desperately to share the stories, share the information, and teach as much of what was inside his head to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Like, that's great. And just that lovely connection that we had 3.5 hours stuck on a train talking about everything. And bizarrely that I had no idea who he was. Even though I knew his name, I would never put a face to the name. So cool. So yeah, that's just one of those little connecting moments of the world. I liked that. That was nice. Generally, I joke that I'm the best-selling author you've never heard of. And there is an element to it. I mean, I wrote the story for the computer game Battlefield 3, but you'll find no proof of that anywhere in the world. But that sold, I don't know what, something stupid like 23 million copies or something. So did all right. And with all the game books and the role-playing games and everything else, you tend not to notice the name of the person who wrote it. You enjoy the thing and move on. And with doing so many different properties, I say it's quite funny. I wrote one book as a guy called Matt Langley. And as Matt Langley, I'm a finalist for the People's Book Prize in England, which was set up by Beryl Bainbridge and is overseen. The patron is John Le Carrier. I mean, it's a good award. And I won one of the quarters and was one of the final 12 for the overall best book published in Britain that year. It was the first book published by Cambridge University Press, the first original fiction published in 500 years. Yeah, I can see the confusion on the face now. That's it. Yeah, it's a very bizarre one. And you want stories about how things come to be. I was invited back to my old school. They wanted me to give the leavers address and inspire the young men going out into the world. So I did this slightly tongue-in-cheek speech about how when I was at school I'd gone to the careers officer, because we all had to do one day with the careers officer, and she'd been sat there and she said, "So what do you want to do, young man?" I said, "Well, I want to be a cameraman for the BBC." And she's like, "Oh, have you thought about being an accountant?" I'm like, "No." "So what else would you like to do?" So, "Well, I'd I think I might like to write Doctor Who." He's like, "Okay. Have you thought about being a lawyer?" And I'm like, "No." So, "Well, have you thought anything else you might like to?" So, "Well, I thought maybe I I could be some sort of, I don't know, special effects person. And there's a stream to this. Her response then was, I thought about being a vet. And it kind of went on. And I was obsessed with the idea of either writing Doctor Who, making Doctor Who, filming Doctor Who, or filming Star Wars, or something. That was all I wanted to do. And they had no comprehension of how to advise me in a career. So they invited me back, and I'm essentially sat there saying to the kids, how many people here want to be lawyers? And a bunch of hands go up. How many people want to be accountants? A bunch of hands go up. And I'm like, I don't believe you. I genuinely don't believe you, because no 16-year-old wants to be a lawyer or an accountant. That's the dream of your parents. That's what your parents want you to be, and that's what they've told you they want you to be. If you were to tap down into your dreams, you would not go, oh, I dream of writing accounts and balance sheets for the rest of my life. Bullshit. You just wouldn't. And I could see all the parents in the audience, and I'm like, okay, I know I'm in trouble here, but I may as well double down and have fun. So I gave the whole follow your dreams, not your parents' dreams, not your teacher's dreams. It's your life. You've got one shot at it, and screw the others. Really, enjoy what you got. And at the end of it, one of the teachers came up to me, and he's like, man, I love that. That was hilarious. And I said, yeah, can you tell I was a teacher for 10 years? It's like, yeah, I kind of vented all of my spleen. And he says, I write computer books for Cambridge University. I do programming guides for Python Basic and stuff like this. It would be really cool if we could do something together. And I'm like, okay, yeah, not massively sold on the whole, oh look, I've got an idea for a book. But he kind of convinced me it could be quite cool if I wrote a book with maybe 10 or 20 challenges in it, where computer coding, computer programming, that sort of stuff was pivotal in how the book played out. And then he would write the computer code so kids could read the book and go online and try and hack the problems and do the problems themselves. So we did this very strange collaborative, half fiction, half puzzle computer book. And it's really cool. The website's still up. The puzzles are still there. And it's a great way to learn to code. And it was all part of BBC's Year of Coding. So that all came about because I gave a very strange speech at school. And it's like, yeah, okay. And then, I've done 5 books as an author called Alex Archer. And Alex has actually written 50 books. And weirdly, like, one of my mates, Joe's done, I think, 11 of them, and John's done 8. And the 3 of us account for about 50% of Alex Archer's output. And this was a Golden Eagle. They were part of Harlequin, which is now HarperCollins bought them, and they closed the line down. But they were the Mac Bolan books and all of these. And so I did 5 of those. So you weirdly get used to not being you. And I've got a new thriller coming out next year under the name Ronan Frost. And Ronan Frost is actually a character from one of my other books. And it's all a bit schizophrenic. But it also means that I get to not be burdened by expectation of what I've written before or the style. And weirdly, Ronan has got a very different style to Steve. Alex Archer has got a very different style to Ronan. Matt Langley's completely different to all of them. And it's almost like I can sit down and a whole new person just clicks into place and you tell the story. It's all a bit schizophrenic. So, possibly the strangest thing I've ever done. Several years ago, I met a guy called Dion Graham, who's an actor. He was in The Wire and other stuff. And Dion has got the most awesome voice. And he does audiobooks and stuff. And he said, hey Steve, I know a guy. His name's Marvis. and he's the manager of a hip-hop band called Alien Ant Farm. And you might remember the name, it's like, they're quite cool. And he runs some stuff and he wants to get into publishing. I'm like, okay, cool. Put him in touch. So he gets in touch and says, actually, I'm looking for someone to ghostwrite a book for a fairly well-known hip-hop guy. And I'm like, okay, I mean, look at me. I look quite street, middle-class, white, posh, privately schooled English boy, writing about, street culture, urban, cool, hip-hop. I can do that. And I ended up writing a bank robbery story called HNIC for a guy called Prodigy. Prodigy was part of a band called Mobb Deep. Now, if you know your 90s music, there are 5 or 6 really pivotal records of the time. You've got Nirvana's Nevermind, and you've got a record called The Infamous by Mobb Deep. And it's in the top 10 most influential LPs of the decade. I thought, okay, I'm ghostwriting this guy's book. No. They decided they were going to put his name and my name on the cover. So all of a sudden, I've written this street-lit thing. And it's hilarious. I mean, it's great. It's actually, it's a good book. He'd written a movie script, and the idea was I would come and I would turn the movie script into a novel. So that was his input, really, was he had the script in place. So I wrote the thing from start to finish. And they did this event in New Jersey for the launch. Akashic did. So they've hired a hall. He sat there. There's a couple of hundred people in the benches in the audience and everything. And he says he's going to play a game. And he's going to read out paragraphs, lines from the book. And the audience have to guess which line is him, which line is me. Now, I wrote every fucking line in that book. And I know this. And I'm thinking, okay, he's going to lie. So he takes a page, reads out a line. What do you think? And the audience are like, you wrote that? Only Prodigy could write that. Anyway, no, that line was Steve. And I'm like, interesting. And he did this 30 times. And on every line he went, no, that line was Steve. So literally he's telling the audience, I didn't write a line of this book. But he's not admitting that he didn't write a line in the book. And I was on the front page of the culture section of the New York Times. And I was interviewed by Publishers Weekly and others about it. And all of the journalists all said, you know what, I've interviewed this guy. There's no way he wrote a word of this book. And I'm like, no, that is true. But I can't say that, but that is true. And the book was actually, it was very successful. It was the African American Book of the Month in Library Journal and other places. I mean, cultural appropriation or what? Seriously, look at it. But because it had his name on it, it was okay. So it did so well that the publisher came back and said, well, look, we'd like to write a full-length novel, not just the short novella. So I'm like, okay, I'll come up with a story based on his concept. He had this idea. And I'm like, okay, he's obsessed with the Illuminati and all this kind of stuff and all this mad shit that I don't believe in remotely. So I would never want to write a book about this, but fine. Sure. And I went away and I came up with the idea, got the okay, and I wrote the book. And I delivered the book and I heard nothing. And I'm like, okay. And then I heard nothing. And I'm like, okay, now I'm getting a little more nervous. And I heard nothing, and I'm like, oh shit. They hate it. And then I got a phone call, and basically he's like, I can't add anything to the book. There's no way I can put myself into this. My readers aren't going to believe it was me. And I'm like, they didn't believe the last one was you either. But okay. I'm not sure. And so the book Ritual, that was supposed to be by him and me, got cancelled. And it was re-released by the same publisher as Sunfail by me. And it's this weird thing where I would never have written this book. I mean, never, because it's conspiracy theories and Illuminati, secret society. It's just like, oh man, it's like conspiracy theory heaven, and that's not me. And weirdly, it's one of those ones where we've sold the movie rights, and I think in the next 2 weeks we may find out if it's being made or not. It's a bit surreal that this thing that I never would have written and really don't want my name on could well end up being the most well-known of the things I've done under my own name. It's like, yeah, okay, great. But yeah, I frequently smile when I look at the fact that, I mean, I've become this weird go-to guy for hip-hop. I've ghost written, I think, 6 hip-hop street culture books now for different people. There's a group name, I can't say what it is, and I'm the guy behind it, and I've done, I think, 8 or 9 of those. There's 2 series that are going side by side. There's a new, there's an African American DJ who's real. She's quite a big deal from what I can tell, and I've just written her book. And they keep coming back. There's an interview with a guy, say Prodigy's being interviewed by a guy who was in the car with Biggie Smalls when he was assassinated, and this guy wants me to write his book. I mean, he doesn't have a book, but he was in the car when famous rapper was killed. Write my book, being in the car. It's like, well, that's a paragraph, but yeah, no, it's very, because you look in the mirror and you just think all these, like with Lionel Shriver and all this stuff that's going on and this whole cultural appropriation, and then you're looking at me and you're going like, Jesus Christ, I went to a public school. I'm as bland and middle class and white as it comes, and yet I've written a dozen street lit crime hip hop things because of this one man who I've become his go-to guy. And a friend of his who's actually, she worked for the CIA, and she was majorly involved in Afghanistan and the insurgencies and all that. She wants me to ghostwrite a novel based on her life, and I mean, her life is fucking terrifying. She's telling me stories, and I'm just in shock on the other end of the phone. I'm like, this is a bit scary. She's talking about going for meetings with village elders, and being a kid, and they've all got these plastic containers with water, because it's desert heat and everything, and there's this 7-year-old kid who's not speaking, and the old guy, and the woman they're accompanying is going up to talk to the village elder, and it all seems to be going fine, and then he says something in Farsi that they don't understand, and it's a signal, and the 7-year-old boy throws his water over the woman, only it's not water, it's petrol. And he's poured petrol over the woman, and the old guy just lights a match and sets fire to the woman in front of everyone, basically burning her alive while they're trying to have a negotiation. And he's like, holy fuck. These are real people. This is, it's horrific. And so she wants me, and I don't know whether I'll do it, but I might. It's one of those things that's like, it could be like a Bravo 2.0 kind of thing. It's quite a good idea. So, we'll see. And of course, if it comes out in 5 years' time with her name on it and not mine, you'll be like, oh, hang on a minute, he talked about this. It's like, oh, busted. Yeah. So yeah, it's a strange thing. But when you write for a living, and you just write, it kind of, I don't know, it strips away the vanity and the ego. The first time you have a book published, it's like, oh, he's lovely. And the second time, it's, oh, he's lovely. At 55, there's an element of it's routine. So you're less possessive, and you're quite happy to be Matt Langley or Alex Archer or Steve or Ronan Frost or whoever. You find yourself caring more about new people discovering the stories and having a good time, and not necessarily being burdened with the expectation. Because one of the things of having done all of the tie-in books is a lot of people. I remember the first couple of books I wrote under my own name that weren't tie-ins. People were like, "Oh, that's Steve. He writes Warhammer," and there's this expectation that it's going to be like Warhammer, or it's going to be like Primeval, or it's going to be like Doctor Who, and it's not. You're a storyteller. And one of my favourite things is always when someone reads something like Glass Town and goes, "Oh shit, you're actually really good," and the surprise that comes with it, and you're like going, "Well, there is a reason all of these publishers keep hiring me to write the books. It's not actually because they feel sorry for me and want me to eat. It's because actually, I can do it quickly, to a level that's entertaining, fits the brief, gives them what they want." And it is quite funny. I mean, I could, the Primeval book was written in 14 days, and actually there was a block of time. Oh God, I wrote Each Ember's Ghost for Fireborn, the role-playing game. I wrote Risen for the Risen 2 for the computer game for Piranha Bytes, for Penguin. And I wrote something else, and I forgot what it was, but it was 3 novels in 60 days. And they're all actually pretty good. Mercifully, they're all radically different. So the Risen one, I don't know if you've ever played the computer game, but it's got a sense of humour to it. So I got to write this first-person fantasy adventure with a snarky sense of humour. It was a hoot, because it was like going back to the kid that I had been when I was 16 and 17, thinking, "Oh, I want to be a writer," and really, just letting that bad sense of humour ride. I mean, God, there's a scene in Warhammer. It's the longest setup for a joke you've ever encountered. Right? Around page 100, I have one character cut another character's finger off to get at the signet ring that he's wearing, and he keeps the finger and the ring, just keeps the whole thing. Purely so 500 pages later, this character can give someone the finger. Just for that line, he gave, and it's like, yeah, I've got a bad sense of humour. I admit it. So I'd say this Risen novel for Piranha Bytes, I delivered it to the editor at Penguin, and it was great. I got a letter back from her, and she's like, "I can't stop laughing. I nearly wet myself." And we've been handing it around the office. Everybody's reading it. It's hilarious. We love it. I'm like, this is great. Now, if you go onto Amazon.de Germany, because it's probably a German company, German translation, first line basically is, "This book is far too serious. It's not funny at all. There are no jokes." And I'm like, every page is a freaking joke. Every line, every paragraph, there is humour. I can only assume the translator didn't get any of my jokes or any of my humour and just created the most deadpan novel that followed. It's like, well, okay, oops. It's a strange job, and weirdly, you can see, or yourself when you're writing, where you hit levels, and you think, okay, I did that okay. I got a little bit better the next time. I got a little bit better, and I can pinpoint the novel where I finally got it right. I actually finally said what I wanted to say, and told the story I wanted to tell, and actually was quite proud of the story I wanted to tell, and that was for Abaddon Books in the UK, and it was a book called The Black Chalice, and it's an extension of the Holy Grail, the Knights of King Arthur, and the idea is that this one young aspirant knight gets it into his head that he wants to become a Knight of the Round Table, and to prove himself, he is going to find an ancient relic, and he's going to find the Dark Grail, the Dark Chalice, the Black Chalice, the Devil's Cup. And it's a really ambitious story, and I didn't realise how ambitious it was when I started it, or how dark. But I realised, I guess 3/4 of the way through it, because I was back in LA, and I was teaching this workshop, and I'm talking to the guys about, you know, constructing a novel and how you do it and the characters and how you build the story and everything. And I'm talking about the book I'm working on while I'm doing it. And they became quite invested in it. And we formed an email chain to carry on asking stuff and answering questions after we'd left. And I remember writing the final scene, and actually writing an email to the group and saying, I think I've actually done something special. I think I've actually, you know, finally written the thing as it is in my head on the page, and it's better than I imagined it could be. And I was so incredibly proud of it. And I was thinking, you know, this is it. This is the book that people are going to pick up and go, fuck me, he's really good. So what happens? The week the book is due to launch and go out, Waterstones, the biggest book chain in England, essentially go bankrupt. And they put a moratorium on the new buys. They can't buy any new books in. They've got, I don't know, three months to try and save the stores. Receivers being called in, trying to sell it off, and a Russian oligarch ended up buying it. And it's all very wonderful story about how it was saved, and Daunt came in and blah, 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 blah. But what it literally meant is my book came out that day and it didn't go into any fucking stores. You literally couldn't buy it in England. And it's like, holy shit, you know, I've finally done something good and no one can read it. And the publishers were all like, oh, you know, crap, what are we going to do? And we were all living on the hope that when Waterstones fixed its situation 3 months, 4 months, 5 months later, they would buy it in as a back catalogue thing. Everyone was basically hoping that what would happen is 6 months on, they would start to stock it as a back catalogue book, and maybe it would sell. And I remember going into Edinburgh and seeing one copy tucked away in a bookstore about 5 times the size of this one, right at the back on a shelf, and you just knew at that point, okay, it's never ever ever going to come out. It's never going to be seen. It's never going to do anything of worth. Bugger. And yeah, so this is one of the favourite things I've written, and you can't find it, you can't get it. It essentially didn't sell. So much for doing something special. But it changes your obsessive hope that each time will be different, you know. We can't all be the best sellers. We can't all be the guys who dominate the charts. And amazingly, you know, you still get wonderful interaction with readers. One of the questions that comes up quite often is, you know, fan letters. Do people write to you? Because the internet now makes it quite easy to contact people. And I can honestly say I have had 2 letters that pretty much saved my life as a writer. I got one, which was it was lovely, and it was a young girl who was about, I think, 10 or 11, who'd drawn lots of pictures of the characters in the book because she loved it, and she wanted to send, you know, would I sign her book for her, and it was great. That's right. And then I got one, and it was the most humbling experience, but a woman wrote to me to thank me for writing the Primeval book. And it's the oddest one to, you know, think, okay, you know, TV adaptation, fine. But her mum had died. And in the week between her mum dying and the funeral, she'd read the book 7 times. And she basically wrote to me to thank me for writing it because it was the only thing that helped her cope with knowing she was going to have to bury her mum and coming out on the other side. And she wanted to thank me. And I'm like, holy shit, no. I'm the one who has to thank you. Because basically, no matter what happens from this day on, it's irrelevant. My entire career, my entire existence, if it's going to mean anything, it's that one moment where it gave you the ability to go on through the hardest time of your life. Nothing else is ever going to compare. And every bad review, fuck them. Doesn't matter. Because of that one moment, that one person, that one thing, that makes everything work. To the extent that, it's a decade plus ago, and I still kind of, when I think about it. So yeah, it's a very strange job, but it's I wouldn't do anything else. So in terms of pure fantasy or high fantasy epic or whatever you want to call it, there's been a few. I did a series with an American gentleman called Brian Anderson, who is going to become a household name, whether you like it or not. I mean, he just is. The guy's a phenomenon. And we did a series of books together called Akiri. And it's, think Conan, it's classic fantasy. And I've got a series, the first book of which is out any day now, called The Relic and Empire, with a guy called Aaron Rosenberg. And Aaron and I, we joke that we're transatlantic twins, because we were born on the same day. Literally, same day, same year, same day, just 4,000 miles apart. And we both wrote for Warhammer. And in fact, actually, it's quite peculiar, because Dan Abnett and Jonathan Green also wrote for Warhammer, and they both had the same birthday as well. So it was, October 12th was a really good year for Warhammer for birthday writing. However you want to phrase that very peculiar sentence, that just lost its structure completely. But I remember, I talk about the idea that, I will have an idea and it can take years for the story to come out. So I'm sat again in that cafe in Gullmarsh Plum, and I have this idea, this quite random idea, about a guy trapped in a tower, and the only way he can escape from the tower is if he learns the lesson, the magic of these bones that are in a fire pit in the tower, because there's no way out. And actually, it's all to do with absorbing the memories that are in the dead person's bones. And it's an idea that I never, ever, ever used. And say, Aaron and I were chatting, could we come up with a new magical system, something that would work? And I'm like, well, how about this idea where magic and skills, all of it, is essentially dead. And the only way you can access it is by accessing the bones of the ancestors. So if you find someone who's like one generation older than you, they may have absorbed the memories of their parents, who may have absorbed the memories of their parents. And then, you've got illegal bone dealers who will break into cemeteries to dig up bones that are 500 or 600 years old, because they will have had different skills where they were close to the roots of the magic and all of this. So we ended up creating this entire series called The Bones of Empire, The Relic and Empire. And it's sort of, we describe it as almost like anime, fantasy, sweeping landscapes, massive magic, and the whole idea of it is just this core concept that it's the bones of the ancients. The only magic that exists is through the dead. So the only way you can cast a spell is by consuming the dead, essentially, and that's like the tagline on the book. And say the hardcover and paperback are out August the 1st, so 2 weeks by the time you're watching this, months ago. And we did a great deal with Tantor in the States for the audiobooks, so we're casting the narrators and that at the moment. And it's a 5-book series, so it's plenty epic. This big ancient evil called the Silence that is threatening to consume everything. And I've got this crazy idea in my head at the moment, and I've talked about it with because I run a newsletter, and you know, I talk to the readers randomly, let them know what's going on, share photos and things. And I ran this idea by them of doing a series without a publisher, and just essentially doing one book a month for 6 months. Epic fantasy, think Elric. And it was kind of a throwaway idea. Apart from once I threw the idea away, it wouldn't go away. And it just kept festering and building in my brain. And I thought, well, I'll talk to this artist, a guy called Philip de Barros, Brazilian artist. And I said, you know, I'll just mention this crazy idea. And he's like, ooh, and he goes away and he paints this amazing painting. And he's like, sort of like this. And I'm like, yeah, sort of like that. Shit, I've got a book cover. And then he comes back with another one and another one. And suddenly I've got all 6 book covers for the series. And I'm sat there going like, oh man, okay, this may be something that's going to happen. So all of a sudden, I am staring at the reality that I'm doing this. I haven't quite worked out how I'm going to do it. If it's going to be like, you know, setting up a Patreon that people can chip in $1 a month to read a free novel, or what. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet. But by the time this interview is actually screened, probably will know how it's being done. And it's quite funny to think, you know, because this is how I started. I started doing fantasy. And yet if you Google or you look for interviews and all that, you'll find that it's always about the thrillers. It's always about Silver. I mean, with reason. I mean, Silver was the 26th best-selling book in the UK in 2011. All the UK. All the books. For the whole year. And yet, as I say, no one knows who I am. No one would go in and say, oh yeah, that guy. I know the wife thought it was quite funny when I told her I was coming down to do this interview. She's like, but you know, you're not a celebrity. No one knows who you are. I'm like, that's right. We went to see Simple Minds in concert when they were over here. And we're sat in the crowd and I'm like, there's a lot of people here, isn't there, babe? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, how many do you reckon there are here? She went, oh, I don't know. 5,000-6,000 people. Like, it's quite a lot, isn't it? So yeah, you know, must be great to have this many people come to watch. She's like, yeah. So if you took this crowd and then you doubled it, that'd be a lot of people, wouldn't it? So, yeah. And if you doubled that, so yeah, I mean, it'd be packed. It would be quite uncomfortable. And then if you doubled that, you know, so the 5,000 is now up at 80,000. I'm like, that would be like a hell of a lot of people, wouldn't it? I'm like, yeah. So if I told you that, you know, Silver sold more than that, that would give you a perspective. And she's like, Christ, really? That, you know, that many? Like, yeah, it's a lot of people. And across the world, I don't know, I think he sold about 125,000 copies, which, I mean, that's serious numbers. And, you know, I think if you look at like the Warhammer and the other stuff, and you count the translations and the Russian and the German and the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese, Brazilian, and all this, you start going, okay, that's like 500,000, 750,000. It's like, holy shit, that's a lot of people. And yet, guaranteed, nobody has a freaking clue who you are. It's this wonderful thing with writing. You're a megastar that they all know. And that often is down to, you know, marketing of the publishing company and how well it goes. Especially when you realise some of the actual sales numbers of some of these guys. And it's quite disproportionate to how much visibility they have and how much they sell. So, you know, Warhammer is a fascinating thing. It would, I think, almost automatically put most people straight onto the bestsellers list. Because, you know, they sell lots of books through their own stores and I mean, perspective, the Vampire Counts books, I wrote them in 2005. They sold about 15,000 copies each for the 3, so 45,000 copies. And then they went, "Ooh, we'll do an omnibus." So we'll put them all together. And the omnibus sold 40,000 copies. And suddenly that's okay, so that's like 65,000 copies. That's not bad. And this is just the English version. And then they re-released these books last January. And I think they printed 10,000 copies, and those 10,000 copies sold out in 2 weeks. So they were already sold out by the time I went down to England. And they were into reprint. I don't know if they've reprinted them a couple of times. But, I mean, they're probably coming up to their 100,000 copies in England, in English, sold. And, I mean, I know they sold 20,000, 30,000 copies in Spanish. There's Russian ones. The Russian one's brilliant. Now, it's a gorgeous book. It's a lovely hardcover. It's on this weird paper. So I buy a couple of copies because you don't always get your own translations. Sometimes they just don't come across. So I source a Russian bookstore, buy a couple of copies, bring them over. I look at it and I'm like, okay, wow, the ink smudges on the page. Well, okay. Don't ever touch this book, just put it on the shelf. Years pass, and I'm showing my dad around my office, the stairs that I've built, and he sees the Russian, and because the other thing, obviously, it's got my name in Cyrillic on the spine, so it's not my name on the spine, it's some weird thing. And he lifts it down and he opens it up, and the book is empty. Literally all the ink has dissolved from the inside of the book. It is just a cover and empty pages inside. I'm like, this is fantastic. If you know the story of the vampire counts and the idea of, this hidden nature of who they are and everything, the idea that their story would erase from the book is it's wonderful. It couldn't have been planned better. So yeah, that makes me smile. But it's a very weird situation to have sold so many books, and yet you can guarantee that if you go to a convention or wherever, they won't know who you are. And yet I did this media convention in England, and the guests were actors from Games of Thrones and Star Wars and stuff. And we had a meet and greet with the fans, so the guys who've paid extra money to meet the celebs. And I'm thinking, well, no one's going to have a fucking clue who I am. No, I mean, they were there with the Stargate books, and they were there with Doctor Who and everything. And these guys, they knew who I was. They loved. So, wow, this is different. This is a different world. And it's that, I guess, that knowledge that, as someone who does media tie-in work and all of that, yeah, you may not be well known within traditional reading spheres or whatever, but in the guys who read the Star Wars books or whatever, yeah, absolutely, they know who you are. It's like, oh, that's a different world. That's a bit interesting, a bit strange. And I did have the strangest experience. I'm walking through a tiny village, and there's 3 kids up in front. There's me and my wife. We're walking through the street, and these kids start talking to each other, and they're looking at me, and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And as we get closer, one of the kids comes up and goes, excuse me. I'm like, yeah. Did you write for Warhammer? And this kid is like 9 or 10 years old. And I'm like, yeah, actually, I wrote a few books. He's like, oh yeah, I recognised you. And he's like, bloody hell. I mean, recognised in the street. And I'm like, okay, that's a bit different. Nice. Unexpected. And quite embarrassing. And the wife's like, oh God. She doesn't even tell people at work what I do for a living. She finds it, quite embarrassing. She can't explain. So what do you do? Well, he writes books. Yeah. So yeah, they none of them know. It's the dirty secret. Right. I mean, I can. It's different every time. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I know when I started, I used to be really quite anal about it. And the first thing I'd do is I'd have to go up to a shop around the corner and I'd buy this huge, like A1 piece of paper. And I would start right in the middle of it, writing, name of a place, name of a person, name of a thing, a little bit, and then it'd be an arrow to another person, and I would spend 2 weeks filling this thing up. Arrows going everywhere, linking it, and it would be the entire organic plot filling itself in. And then I couldn't read it because it was so densely packed and tiny stuff, and it just, where do you start going? How does it link? And you almost had to cross it off bit by bit and rewrite it, filling in the sections. And I filled up notebooks of plot ideas and story to try and create something. I remember writing an outline for a book, and the outline was 45,000 words long. The average book would be about 90,000 words. So the outline was half the length of a normal book. Way too much detail. Just everything you needed to know, everything possibly imaginable was in there. And then almost as a rebellion, I then sat down and wrote a book, and I didn't have a freaking clue from word one what was going to happen. I didn't bother creating characters. I didn't bother doing any of it. I just literally sat down and following Ramsey Campbell's advice, essentially explored the wonders of the empty page, and just let the story tell itself and see what happened. And it is quite possibly the strangest thing I've ever written. It's a book called Laughing Boy's Shadow, and you can't buy it anywhere. And it's a horror novel, but it maybe isn't. And it may be a bit of a fantasy novel, but it maybe isn't. But it in itself, it led to a wonderful American writer called Terry Wright, who tragically he died a couple of years ago, having gone through about 5 or 6 years of dementia, and it led to me actually finishing his last book, which is quite the honour, as he was one of my favourite writers growing up. Other times, obviously, when you're doing something like Warhammer or you're doing a TV book, you've got to get everything signed off. So the details are very precise. You end up writing, chapter by chapter. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. This is going to happen. That's going to happen, and you don't feel the excitement of the exploration of the story because you've worked it all out and everything is blueprinted, because the bosses have to go, yes, that's right. And I know when I wrote Stargate, I got a letter from MGM praising the characters and saying what an amazing adaptation I'd done. They loved it. It was brilliant. First review came out. It's shit. The characters are nothing like the characters in the TV show. And it's just like, yeah, you can't win. But you figure, okay, I must have done okay because the guys who own the TV show actually really liked the version of the characters, that it was the best of the ones in the books and the series, etc. And you just sort of, you chuckle, you smile, and you know full well when you read something and you enjoy it, you just then go and pick up something else and enjoy it, and pick up something else and enjoy it. When you read something and hate it, you feel like you need to stand up and say, I did not like that. So, the people who talk about books the most, the ones who really raise a stink, are the ones that actually feel that they hated it for a reason. There's something wrong.
I feel like I should get it so I'd understand it, because maybe that's my level.
So it's a very strange it's a very strange situation where you know you're going to get more feedback from people who hated it than loved it. So the feedback when it is loved becomes really special. Craft-wise, I mean, I do agree. It's the more you do something, it's like you're exercising a muscle. The more you create plots and imagine stories, the better you become at creating plots and imagining stories. And one of the fundamental things I find I have to do is actually trust my subconscious. Trust myself that even if I don't know the answer now, by the time I get to that point in the story, there will be a spark of genius. And I often joke that I'm not a very good writer, but I've got a really good subconscious. Because my subconscious will make decisions for me that I've got no idea about when I'm making them. And it'll be a line I write, a paragraph, it'll be something that 200 pages later will be fundamentally important and go, that's what I was thinking. Damn it, that's really clever. And of course I had no idea. I've written stuff where I've realised, oh, I should have done something, and then you'll go back and you'll add it. So you think, okay, no, he was really clever because he had it. No, that came last. But trust your subconscious. The answers are there. To give an example, obviously the book from Terry's. It's a really daunting prospect to finish someone's final novel. It's someone you admire, you want it to be worthwhile, you want it to be special, you want to be worthy of them, but also you want it to be what they would do. So you find yourself reading every page, looking for what are the threads that they've planted, what are the seeds that they're doing. And I must have read this thing a dozen times and had no fucking clue what his plan was. But this is a guy who was in the grips of dementia when he was writing it. So yeah, the plan, it's pretty bloody difficult to find. And there's some great writing, there's some horrible writing, and it's like, okay, where's the thread? What is it? And there was a line. There was just one line in the book that I must have read a dozen times and not picked up on. And then read the 13th time and gone, that's it. That's the seed. That's the thing. That's what I pull out and work on. See, Terry's quite famous for doing, say, Manhattan Ghost Story was his most famous novel. 1 million copies sold. It was going to be a big movie with Sharon Stone before it got ripped off by Sixth Sense and Ghost. Those two basically killed it. A lot of what he wrote was about, the mind unraveling and losing itself, and this idea that, we coexist in a world with the ghosts and everything. And he's written here almost like the inverse of what he'd normally do. There's one house in town that isn't haunted. And the rest of the town, every house, every person you encounter is a ghost. It's dead. And I just, I love the idea. But I couldn't see where you went with the story. I couldn't see how it worked until this line perked in my brain. And I realised, of course, he's writing his own story. The one unhaunted house in town is his house. It's the house of the writer who created all of the ghosts that are lingering after he's gone. So I spent almost a year and a half working the threads to create this monument to a friend's life. And it did. It involved a lot of thinking about, character and style, and trying to make it worthy and a fitting epitaph. And that will be delivered to the publisher in about 2 weeks' time. So it's been a weighty project. But I don't know, it's so weird to sort of talk about craft because, you start to know all the stuff logically. When you're starting out, it's a whole different game. Every little piece of advice can be interesting and can be useful. And it can be the simplest things like read compulsively, and then rip off. Because essentially you're being your own version of Philip Pullman or your own version of Stephen King or your own version of whoever. But there comes a point where in amongst all of that, you start to sound like you. And that's the wonderful moment when you realize your friends are doomed to never be able to read you, because they will just hear your voice inside their heads all the time, and it's like you've possessed them. So it's great. None of my friends can read my books now because they just hear Steve. They hear Steve all the time, and it's like they're losing their minds. I don't know, craft advice, it's quite difficult, because this is the stuff, you might talk about in a workshop. The idea of the rule of three, if you like. The fact that when you're introducing a subject, you pick 3 facts about it and keep repeating the facts. So when you need 3 things to make it come alive. More is fine, but less, and you're going to kind of breeze over it and forget about it. So 3 nice little details you can hang up on. It could be physical, it could be belief systems or whatever. 3 things you can say, oh, that's that person, and then 3 unique things for the next and the next. And we have just I don't know, it's the way our memories work, our minds work, I guess, but we need that 3rd one to hang on. I'll tell you one thing I do or don't do. I never tell you what people look like. I never describe the physical attributes of the person. Never say what my hero looks like or the heroine or whatever. And it is quite funny because like I've had dozens of editors say, but what do they look like? It's like, well, they look like whoever's reading it. Because the thing is, if you don't tell you what someone looks like, when you're reading it, your instinct is to put yourself into the place. So I deliberately don't tell you what the hero looks like, so every person reading it can imagine themselves as the hero in the book. Basically, I talked a little bit about the Hans Rosling story with Dad and everything. For someone who's done so much work and been so productive, my mind, my concentration, everything just fragmented and shattered with the grief of losing Dad and the whole situation. And I went for about a year where I couldn't write. I mean, I couldn't do a thing, and I started to actually worry about me, because I wasn't telling stories, I wasn't doing anything, I couldn't put words down onto the page. I would sit for hours and hours and hours, and I'd end up just flicking between windows, going across to check the email, going across to surf the internet, read a message board, play on Facebook, and I might write a line or 2 in a day. And it was driving me absolutely insane. And I kind of went on this obsessive, I want to create a writing environment. I want to create a computer that can't do anything. Go back to 1995, have a computer that doesn't do the internet, doesn't do the stuff, because I'm too wrapped up on the world that I'm losing. And I tried. I bought like old Lenovo's that were like 20 years old, and it's just they're lovely, but they're not working. And then I stumbled across this, and I mean I jokingly call it a toy, but it's fucking brilliant. And I feel like an evangelist for the machine. But essentially, it's called a free write, and it's got a little e-ink screen, and it's the size of a mobile phone, the screen, but it's got this gorgeous Cherry MX keyboard on it. It's great. But it's built in such a way that you can't go backwards. So you can only write the next word. And you keep going forwards. And it means that you can't get hung up on how a sentence is or want to go back and edit and change something. You're forced to tell the story. And the first time I used it, I turned it on, and I found I'd written 350 words in about 10 minutes. And I'm like, whoa, okay, my daily word count would be about 1,000 words. So in about 10 minutes, I'd written more than a third of a day's work. Will it work for the next 10 minutes? Will it work for the next? And first night, I'd written about 1,500 words in about half an hour. And I'm like, holy shit, I've done like a whole day's work in a bit in half an hour. It may be shit, but it's 1,500 words. And I suddenly found because it was completely distraction free, I couldn't check my internet, I couldn't do other stuff, I just had that. I would just put the music on in the background and sit with it. I was boosting my productivity and storytelling probably by 400 or 500% without breaking a sweat. And I was writing 5 times the amount I would normally write. I was going to need editing. I was going to need all the craft stuff that follows, but it was getting that first draft down. And I did a count up, and I wrote about 125,000 words in 4 weeks. You know, that's a good substantial novel in 4 weeks. So I wrote the entire Ronan Frost novel on it. I wrote, I'm part of this thing called Rowan Casey, who's like it's a digital novelist, doesn't have a publisher, but she's done 10 books, and it's a bunch of really famous writers, and we all do one each. And I wrote my entry into the series in about 8 days, 40,000 word book. And it's the strangest, most liberating thing, because you can't dick about, you tell the story. And it is very weird to be sort of 48 years old, having been doing this 21 years professionally, 30 years since that first story. And yeah, to realise, I guess, that, you know, with luck, I'll be doing this for 21 years more, 28 years, 30 years more. You never know. But like I said, you know, the imagination is a muscle, and the more you exercise it, the more it brings story together, the more stories you have to tell. I know right now, sat here, there's at least 6 or 7 more novels in my head, taking shape as it is. And it's going to be nice over the next, I don't know, decade to see them finally make it to wherever they make it. And with that, thank you very much for putting up with me and sitting and listening to it all.